People of Reddit who have been abducted by aliens. What's your story? I used to think aliens were trying to abduct me. Terrified for years. Watched a documentary on sleep paralysis and realized that was what was really happening to me. From that point on, when I had sleep paralysis, I knew what was happening and wasn't as terrified. Plus my husband started noticing the signs and would quickly pull me out of it. They took me in the middle of the night. I was out feeding the cattle under the moonlight, and then a big light came over me. Next thing I knew, I was driving down the road talking to what I later realized was my father, or the person whose body I am now's father. He made a joke about the time being slow, and he had seen an episode of Files that mentioned that time reverses when aliens abduct, so they can drop you off at the same time as they picked you up. Except I think they mixed something up because I am not in the same body I left in. I still remember my whole life before, but I am 18 years younger in this body, so I don't really mind. But a few years after the incident, I went to see if the farm I once lived on was still there. But it took me a while to get there without suspicion. It's gone, like it never stood. Maybe it was all just a dream. Who feeds cows at night? Sadly, I live in Europe. They only visit USA. That's because Eisenhower made a deal that they could abduct a bunch of people and animals in the US as long as they gave us tech and let us keep the nukes, allegedly. They were grey with big fat eyes, little mouths. They just stared while I peed. I don't think I was dealing with the top brass. I woke up. I had to pee like a camel. So I started peeing and one of the grey aliens slapped the wall and pointed at the bowl. Therefore, I got the hint. I kind of duck walked over the bowl, peed in it. I had the shirt I came in with, but my pants were gone. So, my cuckoo was out. It's full Porky Pig in a drafty dome. I'm starting phase 2, which is me sitting on a stool, while 40 grey aliens take turns gently batting my knockers. They were real respectful about it. They were in a line, and then one by one, they'd step up, slap a knocker, and then go to the end of line and wait for another turn. It didn't hurt. It felt super off the books. I swear to God, there was one grey alien by a door just kind of peeking in and out. I think he was the lookout. Look, it's not one of my worst Wednesday nights. My grand exit was out of what was basically like a big airplane. Toilet. Okay. I dropped down 7 feet on the roof of a Long John Silver's. They threw out my pants separately. They missed the roof. My slacks landed on a freaking pine tree, 30 feet away. So, I had to just chill up there with my damn cuckoo hanging till the place opened up. One of the best SNL sketches of all time. I had tears in my eyes after she said, it felt super off the books. They just wanted someone to explain the rules of American football, but I've never watched it, and they got pissed at me for wasting their time. After the standard issue, but stuff, they beamed me back, but it took like 3 hours to walk home. We're talking aliens, not Floridians. Okay. If no one is going to take this seriously, I guess I'll share my story. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I've tried telling this to several of my friends and once to my dad, but they always thought I was just joking around or something. I wish I was. It was 2009. I was 13. I was staying up late on the family computer on a Friday night, playing some flash game or something. I remember my mom had just gone to bed 10 minutes prior. I vividly remember typing in half the URL to addicting games. When I heard it, this weird silence, it's hard to explain, but all sound disappeared, except for the sounds of my fingers on the keys. No crickets outside, no wind, not even the sounds of my loud computer in the room. I stopped and sat there for a second wondering if there was something wrong with me. I remember worrying I was having a stroke or something. Then I was there, this huge space. Pitch black. I could barely make out the edges of the room, but it was vaguely metallic. It was freezing. It took me a couple minutes, just lying there for it to sink in what was happening. But I was floating in this giant room, staring up at where the ceiling should be. There were no lights anywhere, but somehow the small area was hovering in was illuminated. I remember kind of looking around and taking it all in a sort of fugue state, until sound came back. Only now there was this strange hum that was sort of going up and down in pitch slowly, kind of like a motor, but softer and more harmonic or something. I don't really know how to describe it, but it was like there were multiple layers stacked like a chord rising up and down in this weird dissonance that made me really uneasy. When I snapped out of it, I took this huge breath and my adrenaline kicked in. I tried moving, but I could only move my head. My clothes were still on, but I was just floating there, head whipping around trying to figure out what the heck was going on. I was fully awake, possibly more awake than I've ever been since. I can't tell you how intense the fear was. Then this sound of breathing came from behind me, and what sounded like heavy, hard footsteps on a metal surface. Loud, deep exhales with almost this sort of vibration to them. I turned my head as best I could to try to see, but it was coming from beyond the light. My heart was beating so incredibly hard, I thought I was going to die. I started to see a figure emerging, slowly at first. My brain was having trouble registering it. It wasn't human, it was big. As it approached the light, I started to make out the features. It was a horse. This darn brown horse with black hair slowly walked into the light and past me. I remember feeling the heat from its body. As it did, it was so close. Then it went to what looked like a door at the edge of the room, closest to my feet, just where the light was starting to fall off again, and it stood up. I heard a sort of zipper-like sound, and all of a sudden, the horse collapses like skin to the ground, revealing a small humanoid figure. It turns around and looks at me with huge black eyes, then just walks out the door. Before I could process any of this, there was suddenly a presence beside me, and I turned my head just in time to see another humanoid thing, putting this ball with lights on it over my face. Then I woke up, but I didn't wake up in my bed. I was outside my house, a couple kilometers away. My clothes were a little ripped and dirty, and I had this awful headache. I slowly got up and looked around. I was down this dirt road near my house. We lived in the countryside and just outside the driveway of one of our neighbors. When I realized where I was, I just walked back to my house, took an Advil, and went to bed. At the time, I just wanted the night to be over, and I had no idea what happened. But as time has gone on, I know for a fact that what I experienced was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't sleep paralysis or sleepwalking or that thing Mike Birbiglia has. It was so incredibly real. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time, years. And anytime I see a horse on someone's farm or whatever, I think about that night. I think about telling them. But what would they say? I'm gonna be honest with you. That sounds like a seizure to me. A friend of mine once had a seizure while sitting on my couch, but he didn't fall down and start twitching. His face went blank. He sat there for like a minute, then stood up, walked over to the door and left. We all looked at each other like WTF, but then his homie that he came with went looking for him. He went to my neighbor's apartment, walked right on in, and sat down next to him on the couch. Luckily, the neighbor realized something was wrong. We called an ambulance, and that's how my friend found out that he had a brain tumor. I get that you were 13, but have you ever had a brain scan? I was abducted outside my cousin's wedding reception. It's all very hazy. There were two of them, and they carried these powerful hand torches they kept shining in my face. They could speak a rudimentary form of English. They kept asking questions about how much I had been drinking. I presume because Earth is a water planet. They had questions about what we drank, contrary to popular belief about anal probes. One of the aliens kept trying to make me put my pants on, not take them off, but I couldn't find my pants just then. The other alien, who seemed to be in charge, kept talking about disturbing the other wedding guests, and he tried to abduct my champagne bottle. Their spacecraft had many bright lights on it, mostly red and blue. They took me to their mothership and put me in a holding area with some other humans they had also abducted that day. The next thing I know, it was morning and I was standing on the pavement downtown outside the police station. I was very fuzzy-headed, but physically unharmed. The whole experience gave me a terrible headache. Then I threw up on the bus. Today I learned alien abductions are just cover-ups for getting arrested. My brother-in-law says he was abducted. Don't know too much except he was out in the woods walking around. He was gone overnight. He never does that without letting somebody know that at least he's leaving. He was found the next morning completely stunned, on shock. He could barely talk. He never really said what happened. He won't talk about it. He said only that they performed examinations on him. His right foot now has what I can only describe as a birthmark on his right foot. It wasn't there before. That I know. It wasn't there. Now he's got a deep purple mark that covers most of his foot. WTF. I have no story, no memory of it. Had Anne-Marie and Doc asked when I had back surgery. I've never had a single surgery in my life. He, Harvard graduate and neurosurgeon, said I definitely have had some kind of surgery given the scar tissue along my spine. I told him that's where the probe went when I got abducted. He became oddly more serious and wasn't indicating that I was joking at all. He looked at the film a bit longer and seemed to study them deeper this time and then said, I'd bet my education that you have scar tissue from surgery, so no real story. Still have the scars as per my last memory. I'm massively late to this thread, but I have a real story. When I was young, the neighborhood kids used to play dark hide and seek or dark capture the flag, often pretty late at night. Our parents were okay with it, as long as we didn't leave the neighborhood. It was the early 90s. We were basically thrown out of the house on the weekends. Anyway, one night after the game was over and everyone had gone home, my stepsister and I were hanging out in our front yard, just sitting on one of those green cable boxes talking. At one point, she stops talking, points into the sky, and asks about a light in the sky. I turn and look and see it myself. The light was faint blue and was brighter and bigger than the stairs around it. It was moving in ways that seemed impossible, and it became aware we were looking at it. As soon as I locked eyes on it, I don't know how to describe that. I know that it was just this immediate feeling that it was looking right back at us. Suddenly, the light moved towards us almost in the blink of an eye. It went from being roughly double the size of a star in the sky to as bright as an airplane or a helicopter searchlight instantly. There was no sound, and the light didn't illuminate the surrounding area, which gave it a weird feeling. I tried to say something to my sister, but I found myself unable to speak and I could suddenly barely move. I just reneged, turning my head to see my sister looking very scared, also unable to speak or move. I thought I heard a noise and the light started shining on me, which made me turn my head back towards the object, and then I felt a piercing light basically blind me. I was like bathed in the blue light. After this, things get a bit hazy, like I was meant to not remember it, even though certain moments are as plain as any memory from that time. I was in a place that was mostly dark, but there were lights that seemed to hover by themselves, with no visible technology, pole etc. holding them up. I don't know if I was laying down or standing up, because there was a feeling of no gravity or downward force in any direction. I remember interacting with an entity that was humanesque, but seemed to be different, like a beautiful person, but they had no male or female characteristics, completely androgynous, but with very symmetrical and smooth appearance to the face and body. Otherwise, very human looking. They talked to me, but I was acutely aware that it was in my head and not out loud. It was like moments of being conscious with moments of haziness in between. I don't know how to describe it. I was aware that they were doing things to me, but I don't remember what. But I do distinctly remember a piercing device they inserted just behind my ear on my right side. It went pretty deep, but it didn't hurt. It just felt almost itchy for a second, and they told me they were taking a sample and depositing something that would allow them to remotely monitor me for some time. They explained that this was not the first time they had done this to me specifically, and that they would continue to do so throughout my life, and that there were literally thousands of people they were doing this to. It was a scientific study of some kind that they tried to explain to me, but I honestly don't remember the purpose. I was able to ask them a few other things in the moments of being conscious, like where my sister was, and they explained she was having the same thing done to her. I asked them directly if they were aliens, and they found it humorous and told me they were humans from the future, but I got the distinct feeling that this wasn't the truth. Again, I don't know how to describe why I thought this. It was just a different feeling when they told me this versus the other things they were saying. It felt like a lie or simplification of some kind. After some time of being out of it again, I became aware that my body was bathed in blue light again. The darkness started to recede, and I was able to see the stars and the sky again. I don't know how long it was before I really understood where I was, but at some point I saw it came to and realized I was sitting on the grass next to my sister in the neighbor's yard, about 50 to 60 feet from the original spot. My sister came to almost at the same time. We both immediately looked at each other and then to the sky, and the light was gone, but the sun was coming up. It was then we realized it had been hours. We didn't really talk about what happened. We just felt the need to go inside and go to bed before we got in trouble. It was years later before I ever spoke to my sister about that night, and she remembers much less than I do. She remembers seeing the light, being blinded by it, and then feeling weird, and then waking up beside me. To this day, she has explained it away by us seeing a helicopter in the sky and just falling asleep. Because we were tired, she won't discuss it beyond that. I honestly had forgotten about this event until 2 years ago, when my wife mentioned that I had a spot behind my right ear that kind of looked like a burn mark or a scar, but also like a pimple, mole. She likes to pop things and was dying to let her try to pop it. When she reminded me of it, the memories of the event flooded back into my head, and I was a bit emotional, but agreed to let her mess with it. She tried to pop it, but said nothing came out. It's still there and looks exactly as she describes it, kind of like a mole, but also kind of like a scar. I've had MRIs and other scans throughout the years, but nothing has ever shown up, so I have no idea what it is or if anything is inside there. I try to not think of it now, because although I wasn't scared at the time, it is unnerving to think about now. That's my story as honestly as I remember it. This entity knew how to speak English. It wasn't speaking any language. I was just able to understand it and it me. In my head it was English, I guess. Kinda like an inner monologue, if you have those, but it was different than my own. Thank you for watching. Share your own alien encounter story in the comments below. And don't forget to check out our other videos while you're here. See you next time.